Let's talk about school meals. There's no potato chips on the school meal line. So there are, separate from the school meal program is what are called competitive foods. So the school meal program has, relatively good nutrition related to it, but separate from school meals are what are called competitive foods. And up till recently, and so that's like the vending machine foods, and also foods that are served what's called a la carte on the school meal line. So there could be chips and other things that are sold separately from the school meal program, but they wouldn't be part of the reimbursable school meal. So that may be what you're talking about. And then, of course, there's the vending machines, there's school stores. I mean, there's all kinds of places, unfortunately, where kids can buy, with their own money, junk food. So up till recently, virtually no nutrition standards on this separate. There's, pretty much always been some nutrition standards on the school meal component, not on the competitive foods, the vending machine foods, and so forth. So that changed with the most recent revision to the school meal guidelines. And, I want to give the First Lady credit. She's been an incredible champion for improving school meal food. And part of that improvement, yes, she deserves credit. I mean, this certainly would not have happened without her leadership. And yet, it's still a big fight. I mean, it's crazy making. So let's talk about the fight on school meals right now. It's happening right this minute. Part of the improvement to the school meal nutrition guidelines was to require that children take half a cup of fruits and vegetables. That is the requirement. That was put into law. And this is what there's this huge fight over. And there are other things too, like lower sodium, making half the grains. It was kind of a gradual phase-in of more whole grains, making half the grains whole grains, and then moving towards all whole grains. That's been a big fight too. But the biggest fight is over this half of cup of fruits and vegetables. I mean, it's crazy. And yet, you have the pizza lobby, you have, but it's not just industry. What's really troubling about this fight that's going on right now in Washington, D.C. around school food is that the trade group, I mentioned earlier I had been to the School Nutrition Association, is the trade group that represents the nation's school food service professionals. And that group is, very powerful. I mean, they should certainly have a voice in how school food is done. But they, unfortunately, have taken the side of the junk food industry on this issue. And so we have, public health groups trying to fight for this little half a cup of fruit and vegetables to be required in the school meal lunch tray. And the nation's school food professionals teaming up with, the pizza and other components of the food industry to fight this. And their excuse is, it's too hard, we need more flexibility. And of course, the Republicans, you don't have to convince them to take a position that goes against the Obama administration. And so they will say things like, this is, big federal government meddling in school food and telling kids how to eat. And I mean, you wouldn't believe the kind of PR tactics, claiming that children are going hungry because there's also some calorie limits, like reasonable calorie limits. Children are small. They don't need the same calories that adults need. And I mean, even in high school, but they're graded, they're graded based on the level of the, where the child is in school. So the point is that, there have been videos put out, and there was even a hashtag going around Twitter that said, "Thanks, Michelle Obama," which was meant to be a sarcastic thanks, and then they would post pictures of school food that, didn't look appealing, or, claiming that the high school jocks were going hungry because they weren't getting enough calories. I mean, just absurd. This is just the level of discourse that we're having over just relatively minor changes to school food. So that's the school meal side. And then there's a bit of a lesser fight, but there's also certainly been shenanigans in politics around improving the setting nutrition guidelines around those competitive foods, so the vending machine foods. And, I mean, this is just typical sort of junk food tactics, like, okay, not a problem, we'll just, reduce the fat grams in our Doritos to make it fit the new school competitive food guidelines, the vending machine guidelines, right? Because, in the politics of compromise, the guidelines couldn't say, well, let's just get all that processed junk out of the vending machines altogether and just give kids some fresh fruit. Oh, no, no, no. That would be the ideal situation. But instead, it was just tinkering. The nutrition guidelines just tinker with the levels of salt, sugar, and fat in what are already highly processed foods. And so still in the vending machine foods, in the school food stores, and all these foods that are, again, sold outside the school meal program, now you've got, USDA approved Doritos because they have a little bit less fat and maybe, sprinkling of whole grain. So that's the changes that are going on there. And even that, was a fight to get. And the reason they're called competitive foods, by the way, and I've heard school food service directors complain about this, is that sometimes, kids are eating out of the vending machines and then they're not participating in the school meal program. And that's really important and not good for the school because they depend on that reimbursement. So for every child that, is filling up on the whole grain Doritos, they're not buying a school lunch that day, then the school doesn't get reimbursed. And then, of course, they can't run a reliable business, and the school meal program is expected to run as a separate business. It's not part and parcel of, in most school districts, it's not, thought of as a priority for part of how the school operates. It's meant to run as a separate, in the black business. And so school food directors are like, and just anyone who works in school food service, my heart just goes out to you. They are just in the middle of this unfortunate fight, between the Obama administration and the junk food industry. And they do have so many pressures put on them. And, really we should all be supporting them as much as possible. But unfortunately, they're just caught in the middle of all this. But the point is that we don't need competitive foods. And so I've put out articles and comments to the federal government along the lines of, let's just do away with the junk foods in the vending machines altogether because, when I went to school, we didn't have vending machines. I don't know. We didn't starve. I don't get it. Why do kids need to be bombarded with snack foods all day long if they're fed well, breakfast, some schools have a breakfast program, and those are really important, especially for children that come from poor neighborhoods. School food is a critical way that children get their nutrition. Often 2/3 of a child's nutrition happens in school, breakfast and lunch. And so, anyway, go on and on, but enough ranting about school food.